I have 14 books that I need to talk to you guys about. Describes it as bean water, and I couldn't have been more wrong. The rivals to lovers trope. He is a billionaire, he is confident, he is bold. Something or someone doesn't want her there. In my opinion, they both need therapy. A hole in a cave, crumbling estate, a creepy surrounding forest, an even creepier lake. Hi guys, welcome to my October wrap up. I am very excited to announce that I read 14 books. I read 14 books in the month of October, and because of that I decided to do a monthly wrap up because I know I've been pretty sporadic about doing them. I have 14 books that I need to talk to you guys about, and let's get into it. The first book that I read this month was Legends and Lattes. That book honestly threw me for a loop. In this book you're following Viv, and she is a former adventurer. She doesn't want to do these quests, she doesn't want to put herself in danger, and she wants a quiet, slower life. So after this last quest she decides that's it, I'm not doing anymore, and actually opens a coffee shop. So she ends up opening this coffee shop, which ends up being called Legends and Lattes, but she opens this up in a place where nobody knows what coffee is. They've never heard of it before. They don't know what it tastes like. They don't know why anyone would want to drink it. One of the characters describes it as bean water throughout the entire thing to kind of give you an idea of how little these characters understand coffee when she gets there. As the story continues, you're watching Viv describe what coffee is, share what coffee is. She finds little treats to provide in her shop and brings a lot of people together that wouldn't be together, and I call them all people, but this is in a fantasy world. I ended up giving this book a 3.25. I felt like the entire time it was almost a little too cozy for me. I know that might be a little silly, especially because the book is marketed as a very cozy book, but the entire time, I think because I am so trained to focus on high-end plots, focus on a lot of high stakes when it comes to my fantasy romantasy, that reading this book and nothing super major was going on, I wasn't necessarily bored, I was a little stressed. I felt like the entire time I was waiting for that other shoe to drop, which was definitely my personal experience and not the book's fault by any means, but because of that I feel like I didn't get the full cozy vibe. I ended up giving it a 3.25, and I would recommend it to anyone that does want to read a cozy fantasy. The next book that I read in October was The Ex-Hex by Erin Sterling. This book really took me by surprise. So when I started reading it, just because of the title and just because of the way that I've seen other people describe it and the way that I kind of have interpreted it thus far, I assumed that it was going to be super cheesy, kind of cringy, and I couldn't have been more wrong. I was pleasantly surprised. I was really enjoying my time while reading this book. So you're following Vivian, which is funny because I read this right after Legends and Lattes, and that was another Vivian, so it's very odd that happened back to back. You're following Vivian, and 9 years ago she was heartbroken. She had recently broken up with what she thought was the love of her life, and while she is drunk and talking to her cousin, she jokingly sets a curse on him. Turns out 9 years later that curse was not just a silly little joke and is actually a very real curse. Reese, who is the MMC, comes back to town after not being there since his past breakup, and comes back to town to realize that he is in fact cursed. Vivian and Reese need to figure out how to break this curse, what's going on, and work together after their very ugly breakup. I ended up giving this book a 3.75 because it really did take me by surprise. I think the only thing that could have made it go up for me in terms of the rating was if there was a little bit more fantasy. Again, I am a primarily romantasy reader, and I feel like if I had gotten a little bit more of the behind the scenes of the magic system, I would have liked it a lot more. Or if I had gotten a little more attached to some of the characters, I felt like some of these characters, not that they didn't have enough depth because I did like the book, but I just didn't have that final attachment that made me obsessed with them. So between that and the magical system not being super there, I felt like it kept it from being in that 4-star range. Right now I know that spooky season has ended, but if you still want to keep the spooky season alive, or if you're looking for something for next year, I do recommend, because it was the perfect spooky small town autumn vibes. Like, they are the cutest. They have all these fall activities. They have this witchy aesthetic to them that is very innately in the town that they live in, so I highly recommend. Going into the next 2 books, I actually went and finished that series. So the next books I'm going to be talking about are the second and third in that series. If you don't want to know about them, you can skip to this time. I've decided that when it comes to these types of books where it's a bunch of different couples and each book is about a different couple, I will be talking about the plot point of them, and I'm going to try not to talk about the plots of the previous books, but I will be saying which characters are together, which may be seen as a spoil to some people. So I will be putting the timestamp so that you can jump ahead and that you won't be spoiled by finding out who gets together and finding out the new plot points going on in the storyline. Going into The Kiss Curse, which is book 2 of that series, series, we have Gwyn and Wells. So Gwyn is the cousin that was a part of the curse in the first book. She owns a spooky little shop, and in that shop she sells very cutesy, almost cheesy Halloween and witchy supplies. It's not very catered to real witches because she is super responsible and doesn't want to ever give magic to the wrong people or lead humans into a magical world that they don't understand. She fixates specifically on tourists. So she does tarot decks, they don't have any magic, and that's kind of what she specializes in. She has her spooky little shop, and then here comes Wells. Wells is actually the brother to Reese in the first book, so they both have that familial connection. He is very traditional. He comes from his traditional witch family, and they are actually super set in their ways. And when he hears and kind of gets a gist of what this town has become, witch stuff is kind of seen as like playing dress up, he gets a little over involved and decides to open up his own witchy shop across the street from Gwyn's, and now they're kind of having a little bit of a competition going on, the rivals to lovers trope. So very interesting, very fun, and it is very funny to see those two crash and how they end up mixing up with each other. Next, and the final book in that series, we have Wedding Witch. So that is following the third brother of the original three brothers. So you have Reese, you have Wells, and now we are following Bowen. So Bowen is kind of an elusive character. You don't really get to see him a lot through the series because he is constantly away in the mountains by himself, excluded, and you find out that he has a reason for doing all of that, which you don't get to really see in the first and second book. The reason for that is long ago he had a very big mistake that has been weighing very heavily on him, and he will not rest until he can undo that mistake. Following him, kind of dealing with all that, the emotions involved with that, but the way that he gets into a romantic situation is he ends up hiring Tamsin, and Tamsin is a dealer of sorts in magical relics, magical things. She actually is not a witch herself, but makes money from them, and so she goes down, she hunts and finds all of these different magical pieces and will sell them to the highest bidder. That is the third book and the final book in that series. Next, we have a very, very funny romance. This is Fall I Want by Lyra Parrish. Autumn is a writer who is kind of in like a writer's block. She hasn't been able to write anything since she was in school, and now she is still working at the coffee shop that she started working at when she was younger and is feeling a little stagnant in her life. She's kind of comparing herself to other people around, and she's in her 30s now and just kind of feels like her life is still what it was all those years ago. So she's working in her coffee shop when Zane Alexander walks through. Now he is a billionaire, he's confident, he's bold, and he walks in, orders something to drink, and immediately tells Autumn that she is horrible as a barista and storms out. They definitely did not get off on the right start. As you continue, you see the reason behind why he did that. You see the reason behind why she has writer's block. You know, they kind of open up as characters and they start having a fake dating trope. I'm not the biggest fan of fake dating, but this one does make sense. I ended up giving this a 3-star, which I feel like is pretty low of a rating for me. I did enjoy it. I just think that after the couple got together, I really started to tune out the book, and because they get together pretty early compared to a lot of other books that I read, I'm used to romance books where they get together in like the last 2 or 3 chapters, which is not the case in this book. I did kind of check out a little bit. So you find yourself when you are reading romance, when the book ends almost right after they get together and you want that extra bit and you're looking for the epilogue or the extended epilogue, you might like this because you actually want to see them together for longer. The next book that we have is a very, very, very popular book to read around this time, and that is this book. That is The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore. This book I have seen quite literally everywhere. I feel like you can't look up a fall or autumn book without this book popping up. I feel like it is just so popular. It blew up last year and I think the year prior, and it has been everywhere. Going into it, you're following Jeannie. Basically, when her aunt decides to retire, who was the previous owner of the Pumpkin Spice Cafe, she gives it to Jeannie, and Jeannie was looking for a fresh start. Logan, who was the MMC, he definitely takes on that grumpy, I don't want to have anything to do with anybody type vibe. He does have some close friends and he is a family man, but he's definitely set in his ways and has a very, very hard time when it comes to relationships. So when she comes to town, he thinks that she's beautiful, but he does not want anything to do with her. There is something going wrong with the Pumpkin Spice Cafe. There are noises, there are things that are breaking, there are things going missing, there are just like a bunch of things that are bothering Jeannie, and she doesn't know if it's an animal, if it's a sign, if it's a person. She doesn't know what's going on. She just knows that something or someone doesn't want her there. So Logan kind of takes on this role to try and help her figure out what's going on, and he goes into it kind of thinking, if we get this figured out, then you can leave me alone, but obviously from there, the romance begins. I didn't love this book because the main mystery aspect of it, the who's doing this situation, they do find out the reason for that. I found it pretty underwhelming. He falls for her so fast, and I feel like that is something that I don't necessarily love when it's started off as like grumpy sunshine. You know, he is supposed to be guarded and he is supposed to be keeping her away, but he's so obsessed with her so quickly, and because of that you kind of get stuck into this loop of where he is obsessed with her and wants to be with her, and then she's kind of pushing him away, and so then he runs off and then obsessed with her and then he runs off, and it's just, in my opinion, they both needed therapy. And I can't root in a romance book. I cannot root for a couple that I think isn't ready for a relationship, and that's what I felt throughout the entirety of this book. I felt like they were not ready to be together. I felt like they needed more time as individuals. I felt like they were both in weird times of their lives where he was so focused on his past relationship and bringing up so often, and she was so focused on starting over and being scared that she's going to ruin her new life, that I think they both needed more time to settle. And because they didn't do that, because they rushed into being obsessed with each other, it just kind of caused a lot of issues. So a 2.5 is what I ended up giving that one. The next book that I ended up reading was Slewfoot by Brom, and this book really freaked me out when I first saw it. So if you look at the cover, you immediately see a woman with the second half of her body being a goat, and that from the very start freaked me out. In this book you're following Abatha, and she is new to a colonial town. Think like Salem witch trials, but not in Salem, and she is not forced but kind of pushed into marriage to a stranger. So her husband ends up being nice and everything. They live in a small town. They actually live just outside of a small town on a farm, and in the woods around said farm there is something very sinister coming from a hole in a cave, which is definitely where the spooky comes from. So you have that going on, this very sinister, dark energy. But when it comes to Abatha, she does not get along with the other people in her town. She is immediately seen as an outsider and immediately getting herself in trouble. She is independent, she has a mouth on her, and when it comes to being quiet and being subordinate, she does not fall into that very easily and kind of fights every second of the way. As a character, I found her very interesting. I felt like there were a lot of things within the religious aspect of this book that were so interesting, and definitely something that I would recommend reading with another person or reading in a book club setting, because I felt like there were so many topics, especially within the religious focus, that you really could dive into, and especially with her, you know, fighting so hard to be herself. It was just very interesting. So I really do recommend it for that regard. If you're looking for something that's genuinely super scary, I get nightmares almost like all the time when it comes to spooky stuff, and I didn't. So if you want to creep into horror and you don't want something that's going to ruin your sleep schedule, I would recommend this. The second book that I read in that horror video, and next book that I read this October, What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. So this book was so fast. If you're looking for a horror book or any book in general that you can get through very quickly, I highly recommend this book because it was so tiny, and I was able to get through it in basically one sitting, which was so nice. In this book you are following Alex Easton, who is a retired soldier responding to I almost said email, responding to a letter from a childhood friend. So this childhood friend and her brother are both very ill. Crumbling estate, a creepy surrounding forest, an even creepier lake, odd creatures. You're trying to figure out throughout the entire story what's wrong with Madeline, what's wrong with this house, why are they getting sick, is this something that's going to spread, is this a bacteria, is this a fungus, is this a virus? Like, you just have no idea what is going on, and so you're trying to figure that out, along with trying to figure out, is there something more sinister happening, you know, like ghostly, all those types of things. I ended up giving this book a 3.75 stars, and I think that it would have been even more or higher rated if it was longer. Again, I loved that it was small in terms of a breath of fresh air for me. If it was longer, I would have loved it even more. The next books, you guys, I could. So if you are someone who doesn't want to learn about an entire series, I feel like after this next book, because I'm going to talk about the first book in that series, and then after that point, I would say that this is where you would end this video, because I am going to be talking about 6 books in one series from start to finish. I read all 6 books, so I do want to talk about all of them. But again, if you do not want to know what happens in romance, these are actually like romance mysteries, but what happens within each individual couple, I would stop this after the first book of me explaining it. I read The Edens by Daphne Perry. You have 6 siblings and each book is highlighting one of the siblings finding their romantic interest. Now, the thing that makes it different from many other romance series, a lot of like intermixed standalones, is this, it has a lot of mystery in it. So some of the mystery elements are present throughout, like some of those plots you are finding throughout multiple books, but then some of them have like just a designated, this is what's happening within this one book. Some of them have more than others, some of them have more smut than others. They're all like different, but overarching there is a mystery or surprising plot twist element in all of these romance books. I apologize in advance if everything just changed because my battery started to die because I've been talking about these books for too long. Going into Indigo Ridge. You're following Winslow. She has recently moved to this town, which is the town that she grew up going to with her grandparents and her parents. This is where her grandfather currently lives and is the mayor of. She's going to be the new chief of police. She is starting over as a woman and as a new chief of police. She's not greeted the best, definitely not the worst, but her grandfather being the mayor kind of has everyone under the mindset that she only got this job because of her grandfather, and even though that is not the case, other people don't necessarily believe that. So she's kind of fighting that from the very beginning. There was a call for a suicide and she goes to investigate the suicide. Someone had jumped off of a cliff on a ranch, which is where you meet the MMC. His name is Griffin and his family owns said ranch, and it's actually his family and all of his siblings that you're following throughout everything. She sees the body, she gets confused and kind of learns that there has been a string of suicides in this town, that when you look at all the different types of data surrounding suicides, it's not adding up. But everyone in the town immediately shuts her down, tells her to leave it alone, kind of puts it off as, you're an outsider, you don't know us, you don't understand, so just hush. You're just trying to make a name for yourself, be quiet. I ended up giving this book a 4.25 because I was so blown away. I loved the fact that there was something else going on other than a romance. I feel like that's when I like romance the most, and I find regular romance books a little underwhelming because I get a little bored. But when it comes to fantasy romance or now mystery romance, I really do enjoy it. If you're stopping after this one because you don't want to know the rest of what happened in the series, I understand. And I will say bye to you now, and I hope that you watch the next video that I upload. The next couple that you're following are Memphis and Knox. So Knox is the second brother, Griffin is the oldest, Knox is the second oldest of the Eden family. And rather than being a rancher like his brother and his dad, he is a culinary genius. He loves cooking and has loved cooking for his entire life, and so he actually owns a restaurant that is attached to the family's hotel. And the hotel is run by another character that you'll find out later on, but he has his routine, and here comes Memphis with her screaming baby in the back seat. Basically, his little sister Eloise, who is the owner of the hotel, has recently hired Memphis, and she needs a place to stay because they're such a small town. There really isn't many places for them to rent. So when Memphis comes to town, she's kind of forced into moving into the loft on Knox's property. I ended up giving this book a 3.5, and the reason I wasn't super obsessed with it was I felt like Memphis was a little contradictory within herself. She was definitely very, I'm independent, I don't need anything, but she did need everything, and her personal pride and hyperfixation on being like a charity case kind of ruined her character a little bit for me, because while I did understand feeling vulnerable and I did understand being put in a position where you have to ask for help when you're not ready to, and being a single mom so she feels like she should be more independent and have her life together but she's not, and all of that, I understood it, but I feel like it got dragged out a little too long to the point that everything was lined up, everything was, you know, kind of set in stone, everyone loved her, her job was good, Knox is obsessed with her, everything lines up, and she's still like, I don't think you guys really like me. Like, that was kind of the reoccurring issue that knocked it down a little bit for me, but other than that, I loved it. Next in the series we have Garnet Flats. Now in this book you are following Talia, and she is a doctor who is working in the town that she grew up in, and so nobody is taking her seriously. Everyone sees her as just Talia. They never call her Dr. Eden. Then the plot thickens when Foster comes into town. Now Foster is her college sweetheart in a whirlwind of a romance. They were together for a year, and you find out that they broke up for a very big reason that I'm not going to say because I really think you should read it. And it is put on the back of the book, but I still don't want to say it because it is just like, what? He comes back into town because he wants to be together again, and it's a second chance romance. I gave the book a 3.75. The next book in that series is Jasper Vale, and this is following Eloise, who is that hotel owner that you saw from Knox and Memphis' story, but you're following Eloise and the trainer for Foster. So Eloise is the hotel manager, and she wants to become the owner of said hotel, but the hotel is still technically belonging to her parents, and she's kind of struggling to be given that final bit. So everyone else in her family, in terms of her older siblings, has found a way for herself. She's the second youngest, and she just kind of feels like it's her time to grow up and be responsible and be given her part of the Eden legacy. And her parents have kind of stopped and aren't really giving her that final piece. They don't really think that she's ready yet, and so she's kind of struggling with being seen as responsible. Now here comes Jasper, quite literally like a wrecking ball, because they have a weekend away in Vegas for something happens in the last book, and they get married. Obviously it is a big deal to get married, and the unfortunate thing is that Eloise and Jasper don't really know each other very well, so they actually end up getting married as strangers, and that is a big problem when you're trying to be seen as responsible. So Eloise wants them to keep it quiet, and then it quickly turns into a fake marriage, not even a fake dating. Ended up giving it a 3.5. The reason I wasn't super obsessed is because I felt like Jasper was a little too closed off and mysterious. He comes off kind of judgmental and kind of rude, and while I do understand the backstory, it just seemed like it was played into so much that when it came to seeing him in this family light and believing that he was in love with Eloise, it was a little tricky because it was almost too much. He was another one of those characters that I think needed therapy and not a relationship, and so trying to not get angry with him with how he was treating Eloise was a little difficult. The 5th book in this series is The Crimson River. Now this is where we get kind of way back to the way that we had in the first book, with like a big mystery crime situation happening. So Lila is a workaholic, and she's another one of the Eden sisters, and she owns a coffee shop. And so when that coffee, I'm realizing now that there was a lot of coffee shops going on in the month of October for my reading. She owns this coffee shop, she's a workaholic, and basically Eloise, who again is from the last book, she comes in and she convinces her to take a break. You worked for too many days in a row, I need you to take a break, I'm worried about you, yada yada yada. Lila agrees and decides, okay fine, I'll go on a hike. On said hike, she is attacked to the point of almost dying, and the man who does it disappears. She has no idea who he is, he's not from around there, and obviously it mentally destroys her. She is freaked out, she is severely bruised, and just kind of, you know, wondering who the heck this was and why they almost killed her, but why they didn't kill her, and all the questions that you have when there is a random attack like that. But in comes Vance, and he is very familiar with the attacker and very familiar with everything going on behind the scenes of this, because he is actually a cop from the original crime that this man committed, and he is dead set on finding him and figuring out everything with him. He meets Lila, he talks to her about what happened, and they kind of start working together trying to figure out where this man is, because they do think that he stayed in the area. Putting the puzzle pieces together and guessing the entire time what happened in that original crime and what happened this time. It was so interesting. And if you like crime based stuff, like if you watch crime shows and you like crime podcasts or anything like that, I do recommend this romance, because it was very interesting to have that as another part of the plot going on while you're seeing them fall for each other. And this was one of my favorite books of the series. I gave it a 4.25. The next book that we have, and unfortunately was the last book in the series, this is Sable Peak, and you're following the final sibling, the youngest sibling, Mateo. Mateo is not necessarily a mess, I wouldn't necessarily say that, but he's definitely searching. All of his older siblings have their spouses, all of their older siblings have the career that they want, and basically he has no idea what he's gonna do. He is a new father, a single dad, and he's just kind of trying to figure out what he's gonna do with his life, what he wants, what he needs. MC, she is struggling with a lot of inner demons, and there's a lot going on that she has a hard time dealing with, and between her stuff and Mateo's issues, they kind of fall into each other after years and years of being near each other. So it's definitely a slow burn in the regard that it is taking place years and years and years of them seeing each other, interacting with each other, but not necessarily a slow burn on page. It's like you next page and it's like a year later or something like that. So it's definitely something that's drawn out, and the mystery and stuff behind it is focused on her past. Last book was my favorite. I gave it a 4.5, and I loved the Eden series, and now I need to go and read all of Debney Perry's books. That is it for this video. Read 14 books in October. That is by far the most I've read. Getting through so many stories was so rewarding and so refreshing and so exciting that it made me more excited for the reading journey for this couple months ahead and for next year. So that is all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you so much, and bye.